double speed. No, I'm just kidding.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I will try and keep this as brief as possible. I will take my cues from Jason's face if I need to hurry up. So we have been on a bit of a wild weather ride this spring. The Rio Grande Basin received some late spring snow that pushed snowpack just above average. And then mid-April temperatures soared to at least at times 10 degrees above average, and that resulted in an above average snowmelt rate for the month of June. And that fast snowmelt rate raised the river flows rapidly, and we saw the Otoe gauge, which is the USGS gauge in the Rio Grande north of Cochiti Reservoir, go above 3,500 cubic feet per second briefly on April 25th. Temperatures cooled by late April and have remained below average, which has slowed the snowmelt and brought river flows down to about 2,700 cubic feet per second today, which is more than enough to meet MRGCD's 750 cubic feet per second irrigation demand for today. There is still some snow in the higher parts of the basin, particularly in the Sangre de Cristos. The Taos Powderhorn Snowtail gauge is still reporting over 20 inches of snow water equivalent, which is a measure of how much water is stored as snow. But as you can see, the snowpack in the basin has fallen to below the median, largely due to those above average mid-April temperatures. And potentially some sublimation, maybe dust on snow, as Jennifer Fahler mentioned in her report. Here, so I have an overview of the snowtail for the basin. This is at the end of the day yesterday, so these numbers are going to be a little bit different than what we see in the individual basin snowtail graphs. So if we go to the next slide, I have the Rio Grande Headwater snowtail graph. And in all the snowtail graphs I have here today, the green line represents median conditions throughout the season. The purple will illustrate 2023 conditions, and the black line represents conditions for the water year 2024. Conditions in the headwaters are about 74% of median, and as you can see, the April snow melt off in this graph. You see the very sharp decline in that black line. The basin received some snow this past weekend, and that's also reflected in the graph. You see a little bump up in snowpack conditions. Moving on to the Rio Chama / Upper Rio Grande Basin, the conditions here are about 91% of median. You see the same pattern of rapid April melt-off with some recent snow accumulation. The Lower Rio Grande is at about 95% of median, and that's also largely due to that recent accumulation we saw. So looking at the current flows and the remaining snowpack, I think the 3,500 cubic feet per second at the Otoe gauge was the peak for the Middle Valley this year. Barring a rain on snow event, I do not see flows surging above that number again this spring. The MRGCD does not have the ability to store any native Rio Grande water this year. Native Rio Grande water is water that's generated within the Rio Grande Basin, and it is subject to the rules of the Rio Grande Compact. MRGC is not going to be able to store any native water this year because of Rio Grande Compact restrictions and the repairs that are being done on Elvado Dam, as we've gone over quite a bit today. The only storage water available to the MRGC this year is its 2024 San Juan Chama allocation. And San Juan Chama water is water that's imported from the San Juan Basin through the Bureau of Reclamation San Juan Chama project, and it is not subject to those rules to the Rio Grande Compact, which is why the MRGC will be able to store it this year despite compact restrictions being in place. MRGCD is not expecting a full San Juan Chama allocation this year. A full allocation would be 20,900 acre feet, and even a full allocation would not be enough to augment natural river flows all summer if the Rio Grande does not receive some inflows from summer rainstorms. Without native storage, the Middle Valley can expect native water to sustain irrigation deliveries through the month of May, and sometime in early June. These are obviously, predictions based on current conditions and can change, like to hedge this a little bit, but into early June. And once native inflows have dropped below irrigation demand, MRGCD will begin to release its San Juan Chama project water. By early July, I think MRGCD will likely be out of its San Juan Chama water, and we will be a run-of-the-river system again. In that situation, MRGCD will only be able to divert what the river is naturally producing, and in the summer, base flows are typically not enough to meet irrigation demand. This means that farmers can expect limited irrigation deliveries if there are no summer rain inflows. And I'd like to just mention that conditions can change quickly, as we saw last year. We were anticipating our San Juan Chama water getting us into August last year, and that really hot July kind of changed those forecasts. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind. Conditions really can change quickly. As for the weather forecast, in the short term, we're looking at a warm-up this next couple of weeks. There are some chances for some midweek rainstorms as well. But the seasonal outlook for the Rio Grande Basin through August looks like we can expect warmer and drier than average conditions. And I think it's that time of year when we can start to pray for rain. And with that, I will stand for questions.